All right, guys. So this week and moving into the next couple weeks, we're going to talk about what is known as character development. So we're really going to focus on the characters of the movies, not so much the production or the plot or anything like that. Really, how these characters develop and change throughout the course of a movie. So character development is exactly that. It's just how a character changes throughout the course of a movie. A character usually changes as a result of some kind of change in circumstance. So very rarely does a character change just because they're bored. A lot of times something happens to them that causes them to change, some kind of challenge or some kind of shift in circumstance. Those challenges or shifting of circumstance are usually the conflict of the movie, and kind of brings up everything that's coming in the plot later on. Because of this, characters tend to be very different at the beginning of a movie than they are at the end of a movie. This is what we call the character arc. And as you can see over here, we've got a bit of a sample character arc. You see kind of how it starts, where it peaks at the climax, and kind of how they get to where they are, where they've changed entirely. And then as things kind of go down, they achieve their goal and they get to the end of the movie. You'll notice, though, that the beginning and the end are at two very different levels. That's because characters change. They don't go back to being the same person that they were before. And that's important to note. When a character has these changes, they're called a dynamic character. A dynamic character is one whose personality, beliefs, values, they change throughout the course of a movie. So who they are at their core changes. And if they don't change, then they're not a dynamic character. Audiences really like having and watching dynamic characters because they're relatable. They're real. People change, characters change. Many times the change in a character represents the beliefs of the director or a message that they're trying to convey. So the theme of the movie a lot of times has to do with how a character changes. If you've seen any set series, television show, or a trilogy, or a series of movies with the same characters, you see a rise and fall in these characters. And a lot of times, what those characters are doing and the changes that they're going through have to do with the message or the theme of the movie. Our friend Shrek here is a great example of a dynamic character. He starts off being grouchy, get out of my swamp, that whole thing. And then eventually by the end of it, he has friendships. He has a romantic relationship. He has gone a full 180 from his original grouchy, loner kind of persona. A static character is the opposite of a dynamic character. A static character is one that does not change throughout the movie. Static characters are sometimes considered boring or unrealistic because they don't change, but they are important. Some of the greatest characters in fiction are static characters. For example, Sherlock Holmes and James Bond. They have the same traits. They don't necessarily change who they are. They don't change their beliefs or their actions or what they do, but they're still great characters because they are just so consistently impressive all the time. Right? Sherlock Holmes doesn't have a lot of self-doubt, and in the events that he does, that's when we are revealed a little more about his character and we see a little more about him. Static characters can also act as foils. If you've read, in your literature classes, I'm sure that your teachers have mentioned foils to you. Foils are just characters that allow dynamic characters to be put more into focus, right? We notice the change in a dynamic character because a static character is not changing. So by putting those two things or those two characters together in the same situation, we see just how dramatically that main character, that dynamic character, is changing in comparison to the static character. When directors are developing characters, a lot of times they do what is called a character development worksheet. And it's basically just a grid, 3 columns and 3 rows. The 3 columns are beginning, middle, and end. The 3 rows are beliefs, actions, and changes. The first row usually describes the character's beliefs, including their values or their feelings, right? What they think, feel, and what they hold true. And they're categorized by the 3 parts of the movie. What are their values? What are their feelings? What are their beliefs in the beginning of the movie? What are their values and feelings and beliefs in the middle? And what are the values, feelings, and beliefs at the end? The middle row describes the character's actions in the beginning, middle, and end of the movie as well. Those actions are usually controlled by those values, beliefs, and feelings, right? We do things because we feel certain ways. So by looking at the actions and of a character as they change from the beginning, middle, and end of the movie, you can see how they link up with the values, beliefs, and feelings of the character at the beginning and middle and the end of the movie. The final row of the grid describes the changes in character between the different parts of the movie. So the beginning column usually doesn't have a change section because there's nothing to compare it to before because it's the beginning of the movie. So usually you only have changes from the beginning to the middle and the middle to the end. I'll show you an example here in a second. So here's an example of what a character worksheet would look like, character development worksheet. You've got your beliefs across the top. So you've got, in the beginning, the character believes this. In the middle, those beliefs have changed to something else. And in the end, this is what they believe. Actions, again, as a result of their beliefs, because again, nobody does anything unless they believe in it. What the character does in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. And then the changes, as I said, there is no real change in the beginning because there's no frame of reference. There's no history to look back on. Now, to be fair, we can have flashbacks throughout the movie that give us that indication, right? If there's flashbacks to before the events of the movie started, you get an understanding of how they've changed from then to the beginning of the movie. But usually, there's really no indication of a change, and then a change from the beginning to the middle, and the middle to the end. So at some point in the next couple of weeks, you're going to come up with your own character development charts. So we are going to come back and reference this again a little later on.